It was the night of September 15th, 1787, and George Washington had many reasons to celebrate. A few months earlier, in May, he was elected president of the Constitutional Convention. The United States Constitution had just been finalized, and debates were finally settling as the momentous document cruised towards its eventual signing just 2 days later. In celebration of this pivotal moment in American history, Washington participated in one of the greatest parties the city of Philadelphia has ever seen or has witnessed since. This night was also a farewell dinner for Washington before he set off from the city for a much-needed vacation. Alongside the Founding Fathers, the party had roughly 56 guests, which included troops, politicians, friends, and family. On that Friday night at the City Tavern, located just 4 blocks from Independence Hall, Washington and members of the 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry commenced the celebration. This was the same group with who Washington famously crossed the Delaware and wintered at Valley Forge during the American Revolutionary War. The details of the night are hazy, but the receipt from the bar tab was saved in the 1st Troop Cavalry's archives. By the end of the night, Washington's party drank 54 bottles of Madeira wine, 60 bottles of Bordeaux wine, 8 bottles of Old Stock whiskey, 22 bottles of porter ale, 8 bottles of hard liquor, 12 jugs of beer, and 7 large bowls of punch. Now, on the face of it, this is a staggering amount for 56 people, but it gets even wilder when you truly break the numbers down. For starters, just the wine alone amounts to more than 2 bottles drank per guest. But if you really get into the nitty-gritty, the real picture starts to emerge. Madeira wine at the time had roughly about 18% of alcohol in them. Bordeaux had 10%, whiskey about 40%, the porter 5%, the cider 30%, and the bowls of punch roughly 13% of alcohol. All of these numbers are estimates of the average drinks at the time, but some of them are taken from George Washington's very own recipe book from Mount Vernon. His punch recipe, for example, contained half a cup of superfine sugar, some water, 2 quarts of light rum, 1 quart of brandy, and another 3/4 cup of peach brandy. To make it a little sweeter, he then added 2.5 cups of lemon juice. A very boozy drink indeed. So, after doing a little bit of math and crunching all these numbers, you get an astounding total of 19,527 milliliters of pure alcohol drank at this memorable party. This is the equivalent to roughly 70 modern standard bottles of 40% hard liquor, amounting to roughly 1,680 shots. This means on average, every person in the 56-person crew that night drank 30 1-ounce shots each. A truly mind-blowing figure. On top of all this excessive drinking, the staff and musicians at the party also had a separate tab going on for their drinks. 16 bottles of Bordeaux wine, 5 bottles of Madeira wine, and 7 large bowls of punch drank by the hardworking staff. Quite the party this must have been, and surely memorable for anybody who still had any recollection of the night after 30 shots. Perhaps the most incredible fact of all was that George Washington and the Founding Fathers were functional enough just 2 days later to see the Constitution signed. The truth is, early America was fueled by booze. Most of the federal government was run on alcohol taxes, and people drank a whole lot more compared to modern standards. Americans have always liked to drink, a trait that was initially brought over by hardworking and drinking European settlers. However, the makeup of the alcoholic consumption was different before the American Revolution, with less access to industrially produced beer and spirits. At first, the colonists drank fermented peach juice, hard apple cider, and rum, which they imported from the West Indies and distilled from West Indian molasses. Drinking was an important part of the culture, and people passed around jugs or bowls of liquors at barbecues, on market days, and at elections. So much so that candidates gave away free drinks. This was so prevalent that a stingy candidate had no chance of winning. Even George Washington did this in 1757 when he ran for the Fairfax County seat in the House of Borghese. His campaign expenses included 105 liters of rum and 109 liters of rum punch. There was also beer, wine, and cider on the list. This may not seem all that extravagant until you find out that in 1757, Fairfax County only had 391 voters. Early Americans were known to have healthful drinks for breakfast. Whiskey was typical at lunchtime, and ale accompanied supper, and the day ended with a nightcap. Continuous drinking clearly built up a tolerance, as most Americans by 1790 consumed an average of 22 liters of pure alcohol every single year. This, of course, was a period when most people were working in fields, which presumably didn't require much focus. On top of this, living in a tight-knit community meant people could keep an eye on each other and intervene if somebody was thought to be overdoing it. A number of different factors led to the explosion of alcohol consumption in the early 1800s. First, the British halted their participation in the American molasses and rum trade, objecting to its connections with slavery, while at the same time the federal government began to tax rum. Around the same time, the settlements of the so-called Corn Belt in the Midwest created large new supplies of corn, which they soon found out was cheaper and more profitable to convert it into whiskey rather than transport it great distances without spoiling. By the 1820s, whiskey was so abundant it sold for 25 cents per 3.8 liter, making it cheaper than beer, wine, coffee, tea, and milk. This meant whiskey was extremely cheap and extremely available, and American consumption soared as a result. Even the English, who are no slouches in terms of consumption themselves, noticed how sloppy their American cousins were getting. An English traveler named Frederick Marriott remarked that Americans seemingly drank for every conceivable occasion. I am sure the Americans can fix nothing without a drink. If you meet, you drink. If you part, you drink. If you make acquaintances, you drink. If you close a bargain, you drink. They quarrel in their drink, and they make it up with a drink. They drink because it's hot. They drink because it's cold. If they have successful elections, they drink and rejoice. If not, they drink and swear. They begin to drink early in the morning and go on late into the night. They commence it early in life, and they continue it until they soon drop into the grave. By the 1830s, alcohol consumption reached its peak at a truly astounding 27 liters of pure alcohol drank by the average citizen. This comes out to a staggering 96.4 bottles of standard 700 milliliter 40% bottles of liquor per person per year. Alcoholism, also known as dipsomania, was starting to have a serious impact on communities. Women and children might be in physical danger if the man of the house began drinking. If he would become ill or lost his job because of drinking, there was no social safety nets to support and protect his family. With all these things considered, it starts to become evident why at the turn of the century prohibition had gained such traction and why so many people supported this radical change. By the late 19th century, support for the prohibition, which was banning the manufacture and sale of alcohol, was overwhelming. On the 16th of January 1919, the 18th Amendment, which set prohibition into law, became part of the Constitution. Of course, this did not solve everything, and prohibition caused many new problems to emerge. But for today, that's it, and we'll be discussing the rest in a different video.